The most dangerous weapon inside the British monarchy isn't a crown, a sword, or even a throne. It's a file. A file so explosive that when it landed on the desk of Prince William, palace staff say the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace changed overnight.
Because this wasn't just paperwork. This was the California Nexus Dossier.
And according to sources whispering through royal corridors, the moment William opened that document, the future king realized something chilling. The attacks against Catherine, Princess of Wales, were not random.
Not gossip.
Not harmless internet trolls. No. What investigators allegedly uncovered looked more like a coordinated digital operation, a carefully engineered storm of viral rumors, conspiracy videos, and anonymous accounts designed to humiliate a princess fighting for her life. But here's the question no one in the palace wants to answer out loud. Why did the digital trail reportedly lead straight to California? Why were analysts suddenly mapping connections between influencer networks, media outlets, and a certain Montecito power circle connected to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle? And why, after years of royal silence, did Prince William suddenly seize final authority behind closed doors? Because insiders claim that what was hidden inside the California Nexus dossier didn't just expose a scandal. It exposed a war inside the House of Windsor. And tonight, we're opening that file. The moment the file was placed on the polished oak desk, the room reportedly went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a quiet evening. The kind of silence that follows a realization. The realization that something has gone very, very wrong. According to insiders, the document sitting in front of Prince William was not a routine intelligence briefing. It wasn't palace gossip, and it certainly wasn't another harmless internet rumor report. It was labeled with 3 words that immediately raised alarms inside the royal household: California Nexus Assessment. And if the whispers from palace corridors are even partially true, that assessment forced the future king to confront a possibility that few inside British royal family ever wanted to say out loud. The attacks against Catherine, Princess of Wales, were not just internet noise.
They were structured, coordinated, engineered.
For months the world had watched the strange online storm surrounding Catherine. Endless TikTok videos dissecting her appearance. Viral YouTube breakdowns questioning her health. Twitter threads analyzing every photograph like amateur detectives on caffeine. To the casual observer, it looked like the internet doing what the internet does best: gossip, speculate, exaggerate. But cyber analysts working quietly behind the scenes noticed something unusual.
The timing.
The amplification. The repetition of the same narratives across hundreds of accounts. It looked less like chaos, and more like choreography. One palace technology advisor reportedly described it in blunt terms. This isn't a rumor mill.
This is a machine.
And the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the digital trail became. Thousands of posts.
Hundreds of anonymous accounts.
Dozens of influencer pages pushing identical theories.
And at the center of the network,
a cluster of activity originating from California.
Specifically the region surrounding Montecito.
Yes, Montecito, the same celebrity enclave now associated with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, investigators were careful with their wording. The report did not claim that Harry or Meghan were personally operating bot farms like villains in a spy movie, but it did highlight what analysts described as a narrative ecosystem. A network of influencers, bloggers, commentators, and anonymous accounts that appeared unusually synchronized whenever Catherine became the subject of online debate. And that synchronization, according to the report, was statistically suspicious. Because every time Catherine made a public appearance,
the machine woke up.
When the palace released a hopeful update about her recovery, a wave of commentary suddenly appeared questioning whether the photos were real. When Catherine stepped out smiling beside Prince William, dozens of viral posts appeared analyzing her facial expressions frame by frame like a forensic investigation. When doctors confirmed progress in her treatment, conspiracy threads exploded suggesting the entire illness was fabricated.
It was relentless.
But what reportedly shattered William's patience wasn't the criticism. Royal families have survived criticism for centuries.
It was the cruelty.
One palace staff member described a moment that insiders say changed everything. Late one evening inside Adelaide Cottage, Catherine was quietly scrolling through her iPad. She had been advised by staff to avoid social media entirely. But curiosity, that stubborn human instinct, got the better of her.
And what she saw reportedly left the room cold.
Videos mocking her appearance during chemotherapy.
Posts accusing her of laziness.
Commentary suggesting she had invented cancer as a publicity stunt. Imagine battling one of the most frightening illnesses on Earth, and opening your phone to see strangers debating whether your suffering is real. At that moment, Insiders say Prince William stopped seeing the situation as a public relations problem.
He started seeing it as a security problem.
Because if someone could weaponize the internet against the future queen during a medical crisis, what else could they do? The California Nexus Dossier attempted to answer that question. Page after page documented patterns of amplification. Accounts boosting each other. Influencers repeating identical talking points. And several financial connections linking media personalities to private donors within the American entertainment sphere.
Nothing illegal on the surface.
But enough coordination to make cyber investigators uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. One analyst reportedly summarized the findings with a phrase that echoed through palace discussions. This is reputational warfare. And suddenly, the old royal playbook looked dangerously outdated. For generations, the monarchy relied on a single defensive philosophy. Never complain. Never explain.
The idea was simple. Ignore controversy long enough and the public eventually moves on. But the internet doesn't move on. The internet multiplies.
A rumor posted at midnight can become a trending global theory by sunrise. Silence, in the digital age, doesn't calm the storm. It feeds it. That was the brutal reality confronting Prince William as he studied the California Nexus report. Because if the analysis was correct, the palace wasn't dealing with random gossip anymore. They were dealing with a narrative battlefield. And on that battlefield, Catherine was standing alone. For William, the situation carried echoes of history he knows all too well. His mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, had once been the most photographed woman on Earth. The press chased her through tunnels, airports, and city streets.
But at least those cameras belonged to identifiable journalists.
Today's cameras are invisible.
Anonymous accounts. Bot networks.
Algorithm-driven outrage machines. You can't confront them at a press conference.
You can't outrun them in a car. You can only outmaneuver them.
And that realization reportedly led to one of the most dramatic shifts in modern royal strategy. Because for the first time in decades, the future king began considering something the palace traditionally fears more than scandal. Direct confrontation. According to sources familiar with the discussions, William began quietly assembling a small advisory circle.
Cybersecurity experts. Legal strategists. Media analysts.
Not the traditional palace courtiers who specialize in polite diplomacy. This was a different kind of team.
A team built for the information age. The first step was simple. Identify the network. Map its influence.
Understand who benefits when the Princess of Wales becomes the center of global controversy.
The second step? That was far more controversial.
Because the dossier suggested that if the narrative machine continued operating unchecked, the damage wouldn't stop with Catherine. It could destabilize the monarchy's credibility itself. And that possibility triggered a chilling realization inside the palace. The royal family wasn't just facing a scandal. They were facing a modern reputational war. One fought not with soldiers, but with hashtags. Not with tanks, but with algorithms. And somewhere inside the growing pile of intelligence reports, one phrase kept appearing again and again. California Nexus. What exactly that nexus represents, and why it suddenly pushed Prince William to seize unprecedented authority, is where this story becomes even more explosive. What happened next did not unfold in front of cameras.
There were no royal carriages.
No balcony appearances.
No carefully rehearsed press statements.
Instead, the next phase of this story unfolded behind the thick stone walls of one of the most private royal residences in Britain, Balmoral Castle. And according to several insiders, the meeting that took place there was unlike anything the modern monarchy had seen in decades.
Because this wasn't a family dinner. It was a strategy session. A crisis council.
Some palace aides would later describe it using a phrase normally reserved for military briefings: the war room. Gathered inside were the figures who now hold the fragile future of the crown in their hands. At the head of the table sat King Charles III, still recovering from his own health battle but watching events unfold with the cautious eyes of a monarch who has spent his entire life navigating royal storms. Beside him was Queen Camilla, a woman who knows better than almost anyone how brutal public opinion can be.
Across from them sat the man who had called this meeting, Prince William.
And on the table between them lay the same document that had ignited the crisis.
The California Nexus Dossier.
According to sources familiar with the discussion, William didn't begin with ceremony.
He began with evidence. Charts mapping digital traffic.
Timelines showing how certain online narratives appeared within minutes of each other across different platforms. Clusters of social media accounts amplifying identical claims. Influencers pushing the same talking points with eerie consistency. It looked less like spontaneous internet chatter and more like a synchronized broadcast system. One analyst reportedly summarized it with a phrase that made the room uncomfortable.
"This is not gossip.
This is narrative engineering."
The room went quiet.
Because if that statement was true, the implications were enormous. For decades, the royal family had survived by staying above the chaos.
They rarely fought back publicly. They allowed critics to shout themselves tired. But the digital age had changed the battlefield.
The California Nexus report suggested that the palace was now dealing with something new, an ecosystem that thrived on outrage. An ecosystem that could manufacture controversy overnight. And more importantly, an ecosystem that benefited financially every time royal drama exploded online. And that's where things became particularly sensitive. Because several of the report's influence maps led back, indirectly, to media personalities and commentary networks based in the same region that had become the new home of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Again, the report stopped short of direct accusations. But the proximity raised uncomfortable questions. Was this ecosystem intentionally targeting Catherine? Or had the royal family simply become the most profitable storyline in the modern celebrity economy? Because in the age of algorithms, controversy is currency. Every rumor means clicks.
Every scandal means ad revenue.
Every conspiracy means millions of views. And few families on Earth generate as much global attention as the House of Windsor. According to one royal advisor present during the briefing, William asked a question that changed the tone of the entire meeting. At what point does silence become surrender? For years, the monarchy had followed the famous rule.
Never complain. Never explain.
But the California Nexus analysis suggested that this philosophy might now be doing more harm than good. Because silence was no longer calming the chaos.
It was allowing it to grow.
And the person suffering most from that silence was Catherine, Princess of Wales. At one point during the meeting, sources claim William showed the group a series of screenshots. Videos mocking Catherine's appearance during treatment. Posts questioning whether her illness was real. Comments celebrating conspiracy theories about her disappearance from public events. For a moment, the room reportedly fell into stunned silence. Even Queen Camilla, who had endured decades of public hostility during her own controversial journey into the royal family, was said to be visibly shaken. Because criticism of royals is nothing new.
But attacking someone while they are battling cancer?
That crosses a line even the most cynical observers rarely cross. And that's when the discussion reportedly took a dramatic turn. Instead of debating public relations strategies, the group began discussing something far more serious.
Containment.
If the narrative machine was real, then the palace needed a firewall. A legal firewall. A commercial firewall. A digital firewall. One senior advisor reportedly used a surprisingly modern metaphor.
You don't argue with a computer virus. You isolate it.
And that idea began shaping what insiders now describe as the most aggressive reputation defense strategy the modern monarchy has ever considered. The first element involved legal teams quietly compiling documentation. Evidence of coordinated online harassment. Records of bot amplification. Examples of defamatory claims.
Not for a press conference, but for potential lawsuits.
The second element involved corporate influence. The monarchy may appear ceremonial, but its symbolic power still carries enormous weight in global business circles. Royal warrants,
charitable partnerships, brand prestige.
All of it represents economic gravity. And according to insiders, that gravity could be used strategically. Because companies rarely want to be associated with reputational warfare involving the British Crown. The third element was perhaps the most controversial of all. Information control. For years the palace had relied on traditional media outlets to shape public narratives. But the internet had shattered that system. Now influence lived in podcasts, TikTok channels, YouTube commentary networks, and viral threads posted at 3 a.m.
So the palace began studying those spaces. Not to censor them, but to understand them. To map how rumors spread. To track how narratives evolve.
To identify who benefits when chaos erupts. And the deeper they looked, the clearer one uncomfortable truth became. Royal silence was no longer a strategy. It was a vulnerability. By the time the Balmoral meeting ended, insiders say one thing had become clear. The old rules were about to change. Because Prince William had reached a personal conclusion.
Protecting the crown was important, but protecting his wife mattered more.
And if defending Catherine, Princess of Wales, meant rewriting decades of royal tradition, then that's exactly what he was prepared to do. What none of them fully realized at that moment was how quickly the consequences of that decision would begin to ripple outward. Because once the palace quietly activated its new defensive strategy, the shockwaves didn't stay inside royal walls.
They spread across boardrooms. media studios, and the glittering social circles of California.
And suddenly, people who once believed they were safely outside the monarchy's reach began to notice something strange.
Phone calls stopped. Partnership discussions paused. Invitations quietly disappeared. It was subtle,
Almost invisible. But to those paying attention, it felt like the lights in a very powerful building had just been switched on. The shift didn't happen with a public announcement. There was no dramatic speech from a palace balcony. No official statement stamped with the royal crest. No headline declaring war inside the House of Windsor. Instead, the change moved through the system the way power usually does in elite circles.
quietly, subtly,
And yet, unmistakably. Within days of the confidential discussions, executives in several international media and corporate offices began receiving unusual communications.
not threats, not ultimatums, just carefully worded advisory notes. Polite,
Professional. Almost friendly. But the message hidden between the lines was impossible to miss.
the British Crown was watching.
And suddenly, partnerships that once looked glamorous started to look risky. One senior public relations consultant in London reportedly described the atmosphere with a single sentence: nobody wants to accidentally end up on the wrong side of the future king. Because whether people like it or not, the reality is simple. One day, Prince William will sit on the throne. And when that day arrives, every brand, institution, and charity connected to the monarchy will inevitably fall under his symbolic influence. That reality began to echo through corporate boardrooms faster than any palace press release ever could.
Fashion houses, streaming platforms, luxury brands.
Suddenly, conversations that once revolved around celebrity collaborations started including a new question: will this upset the palace? And when executives start asking that question, deals tend to slow down.
Very quickly.
Inside the royal circle, insiders say this moment marked the beginning of what some advisors privately call the firewall era. The strategy was simple. If an ecosystem was profiting from royal controversy, then the palace would quietly remove the oxygen that allowed that ecosystem to thrive. Not through public fights, through institutional gravity. The monarchy has something few modern celebrities possess: longevity. It has existed through wars, revolutions, scandals, and political upheavals.
It doesn't need to win every news cycle. It only needs to outlast them.
And that patience, according to royal observers, is exactly what made the next phase so unsettling for critics. Because instead of arguing with rumors, the palace simply kept building its wall. Legal teams began compiling archives of defamatory claims circulating online. Cyber analysts tracked how certain viral narratives traveled across platforms. Communications advisors monitored the rise and fall of influencer commentary networks. Every piece of information was quietly filed,
Stored, organized, prepared. For what purpose?
That question is still circulating through royal watching circles today. Some believe the palace is preparing for a wave of strategic legal challenges. Others think the evidence will be used to pressure technology companies into addressing coordinated harassment networks. And a few more dramatic commentators suggest something even bigger is coming: a public exposure. A moment when the mysterious California Nexus network is dragged into the light for the world to examine. Whether that moment ever happens remains unclear. But what is clear is that the psychological atmosphere surrounding the royal feud has changed dramatically, because the narrative of recent years painted a simple picture. On one side stood the quiet institution of the monarchy. On the other stood the outspoken, media-savvy world of modern celebrity activism. For a long time, it looked like the celebrity side had the louder voice,
The louder microphone, the louder headlines. But power isn't always loud.
Sometimes it whispers. And when it whispers, entire industries listen. One example frequently mentioned by insiders involves the sudden cooling of several rumored brand collaborations. For months, entertainment reporters speculated about major partnerships involving Meghan Markle.
Luxury fashion endorsements, global lifestyle campaigns, high-profile ambassador roles.
Yet according to several industry analysts, those discussions appeared to stall almost overnight. No dramatic cancellations,
just quiet pauses.
And in the world of corporate negotiations, a pause can sometimes be more powerful than a rejection.
Because it leaves everyone wondering the same thing. Who made the phone call?
Of course, no executive would publicly admit receiving pressure from royal institutions.
That would be a diplomatic nightmare.
But the timing of these sudden shifts has fueled endless speculation among royal commentators, especially given the growing authority of Prince William within the strategic operations of the monarchy. Insiders say his leadership style is noticeably different from previous generations. Less ceremonial,
more corporate, more analytical.
Instead of treating the monarchy like a museum piece preserved by tradition, William reportedly views it more like a global organization that must actively defend its reputation in a digital marketplace. And in that marketplace, perception is everything. Because once a narrative takes hold online, it can spread across continents before breakfast. That's why Catherine's role in this evolving strategy has become increasingly fascinating to royal observers. While the public sees Catherine, Princess of Wales, as a symbol of calm grace, insiders suggest she has quietly become one of the most influential voices in shaping the monarchy's digital response. Friends close to the couple say her experience navigating relentless online speculation during her illness fundamentally changed how she views the internet. Not as a harmless gossip machine, but as a battlefield where reputations can be dismantled in real time. And if that battlefield cannot be avoided, then it must be understood. Which is why Catherine reportedly encouraged the palace to adopt a more data-driven approach to monitoring online narratives. Mapping trends, tracking amplification patterns, identifying coordinated campaigns before they spiral out of control. It's a strategy that feels less like traditional royal diplomacy and more like modern crisis management. And it signals something important about the future of the monarchy. The next generation is not waiting quietly for the crown. They are already running parts of the institution. Meanwhile, the wider world continues watching the royal drama unfold like a global reality series. Supporters of Prince Harry argue that he and Meghan simply chose independence and are unfairly blamed for internet culture they cannot control. Critics insist their media presence fuels a narrative ecosystem that profits from royal conflict. And somewhere between those two interpretations lies a complicated reality that few outsiders fully understand. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The balance of power inside the royal story is shifting.
Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably.
Because behind the ceremonial smiles, behind the polished photographs and carefully staged public appearances, a deeper transformation is underway. The monarchy is learning how to survive in an era where influence no longer flows only from palaces and parliaments. It flows from algorithms, platforms, digital narratives that can rise or collapse in hours. And if the whispers surrounding the California Nexus Dossier are even partially accurate, then the future king has already made his decision.
Silence is no longer the crown's shield.
Strategy is. And now the question hanging over this entire story is impossible to ignore.
What actually happens next?
Because if the whispers surrounding the California Nexus Dossier are even half true, then something much bigger than a family disagreement is unfolding behind palace walls. We may be witnessing the moment when Prince William quietly reshaped how the modern monarchy defends itself in the digital age.
For decades, the royal rule was simple. Stay silent, stay dignified, let the noise burn itself out. But the internet doesn't burn out. It multiplies.
And when rumors, conspiracies, and viral narratives begin targeting someone fighting for her health, the question becomes brutally simple. At what point does dignity turn into vulnerability? At what point does silence stop being noble and start becoming dangerous? That's the line many royal watchers believe was crossed when the online storm surrounding Catherine, Princess of Wales, reached its peak. And if the palace truly activated a quiet defensive strategy, it could explain why the atmosphere around the royal feud suddenly feels different, more controlled,
more calculated, almost like the monarchy has stopped reacting and started planning. But here's the real mystery.
How far is Prince William willing to go to protect his family and the future of the crown? Will the evidence inside the California Nexus report ever become public? Will the growing tension between William and Prince Harry eventually explode into an open confrontation? Or will the palace continue using quiet power instead of public drama? Now I want to hear your verdict. Do you think William is right to take control and defend the monarchy's reputation? Or do you believe this royal conflict has already gone too far to ever be repaired? Drop your opinion in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And if you want to stay ahead of the next explosive royal investigation, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, the next file about to open may be even bigger than this one.